Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. Today we're going to talk about Dinway Electrical Manufacturing Company, sometimes referred to as DEMCO. So we talk about ceiling fans from Hong Kong. A lot of the imported ceiling fans that collectors like were from Hong Kong. Ceiling fans were generally made in Hong Kong if they weren't made in the US until 1985 when mainland China production became an option, and also Taiwan in the early 80s. But Hong Kong was probably the earliest venture into ceiling fans in the Far East. So Dinway is one of the big three companies that started manufacturing ceiling fans over there before anybody else, which was SMC, we talked about in last video, Dinway, and Wingtat, which we'll talk about in the future. So let's talk about Dinway. I don't have a whole lot of information on them, but I have enough to share. So they were founded in 1949. They were incorporated in 1970. And they were making fans, selling them overseas. They were not sold in the US. Then in the early 70s, someone, I don't have his name, traveled, saw a fan overseas, he liked it, brought it back to the US, and thought about importing them into here. I can probably find his name. You know what? Let me make this an outtake and see if I can find his name. Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is where we talk about ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. So today we're going to talk about Dinway. And if you don't know them, they're often referred to as DEMCO, and we often think about them as the early Gulf Coast fans. Let's talk about why. So Dinway was one of the big three Hong Kong ceiling fan manufacturers. When we think about imported ceiling fans in the US, collectors tend to like the early ones from Hong Kong before manufacturing came to mainland China, ceiling fan manufacturing, and really even before Taiwan became a popular ceiling fan manufacturing destination. The big three were SMC, we talked about in last video, Dinway, and Wingtat. Both of those were making fans. What? Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is the series of videos where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. Today we're going to talk about Dinway. And their name doesn't get tossed around a lot, but they were one of the big three players in Hong Kong ceiling fans before the 1980s. A lot of us know them as DEMCO. DEMCO was actually the name given to the fans by one of the importers. The factory's name is Dinway, and they'd been around long before any of the fans were called DEMCO. So let's get into it. Dinway was founded in Hong Kong in 1949 by Li Yi, making ceiling fans. By the 60s, they were making 600 fans a day, and their major export was to Africa. They incorporated in 1970. In the early 70s, and we don't have an exact year, but we know it was before 1973, William Wallow, a Florida businessman, discovered a DEMC fan in a neighbor's house in Florida. The fan had been brought over from Hong Kong by an airline pilot as a novelty item. The DEMC fan rekindled a previous interest in ceiling fans developed by Wallow during a trip to Brazil. Curious about the cost and quality of the DEMC fan. You know what? I'm going to start over. I'm going to call it Dinway the whole way through. Hello and welcome to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. Today we're going to talk about Dinway. It's not a name that gets tossed around a lot, but Dinway was one of the first big three Hong Kong ceiling fan factories, along with SMC and Wingtat, long before Union and Evergo and the others even popped up. So, a lot of us know Dinway as DEMCO. That was actually one of the names given to the fans when they were imported. The name of the factory is actually Dinway. Let's talk about them. They were founded in 1949 by Li Yi, making ceiling fans and small appliances. By the 1960s, they were making 600 fans a day, and their biggest export was to South Africa. In 1970, they incorporated. In the early 70s, William Wallow, a Florida businessman, discovered a Dinway fan in a neighbor's house in Florida. The fan had been brought over from Hong Kong by an airline pilot as a novelty item. The Dinway fan rekindled a previous interest in ceiling fans developed by Wallow during a trip to Brazil. Curious about the cost and quality of the Dinway fan, Wallow contacted Nassim Bachar, a business acquaintance from Chicago who had an import company called Midwest Electronics Importers. He brought electronics in from overseas. Bachar agreed to obtain 6 Dinway fans for Wallow on his next trip. He brought the 6 in, they liked them. On a subsequent trip, he brought in 144 fans, and they went into the ceiling fan import business. And in 1973, they founded a company called Gulf Coast. And at that time, their exclusive supplier for Gulf Coast fans was Dinway. So in 1975, they put it all in contract. Dinway officially became the exclusive supplier of DEMC, DEMCO, and Gulf Coast fans through Midwest Electric, which was the import company out of Chicago. In 1978, Gulf Coast was sold to somebody named Wilmer Barrett. Also in 1978, they started using model names like the Sea Breeze and Showboat. In 1979, business really starts to take off, and Dinway cannot supply enough fans for Gulf Coast, so Gulf Coast starts approaching other factories. And that's how you get fans from Commander, for example, that look exactly like Dinway or DEMCO fans. And the only difference, the biggest, most significant difference, is Commander is Taiwan and Dinway is Hong Kong. So if you look at a fan that appears to be one of the two, you can tell which it is by where it was made. That's 1979. Also in 1979, a store called Dan's Fan City was founded. In 1982, the DEMCO style spinner with wood blades was patented by Ho Chen Cheng, and they filed the patent in the UK. In 1983, Dan's Fan City buys Gulf Coast. So keep in mind that in 1979, Dan's Fan City was selling Gulf Coast fans, among what other brands? Okay, that's too many tongue ties. We're going to start over. Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. So today we're going to talk about Dinway. It's not a name you might have heard a lot. A lot of times we know their fans as Gulf Coast or DEMCO, but the actual name of the factory is Dinway. DEMCO was a name given to the fans by one of the importers, and Gulf Coast was a store chain, that sold, we're starting over. Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. Today we're going to talk about Dinway. Dinway is not a name you hear all that much, but they were one of the big 3 ceiling fan manufacturers out of Hong Kong prior to 1980. Before Union and Evergo and everybody else became popular, there were 3 big manufacturers in Hong Kong. There was SMC, Wingtat, and Dinway. We often know their fans as DEMCO. That was actually the name given to the fans by one of the importers. The factory's name is Dinway. So let's talk about them. They were founded in 1949 by Li Yi. By the 60s, they were making 600 fans a day, and their biggest export was to the continent of Africa, primarily the country of South Africa. They incorporated in 1970. In the early 70s, William Wallow, a Florida businessman, discovered a Dinway fan in a neighbor's house in Florida. The fan had been brought over from Hong Kong by an airline pilot as a novelty item. The Dinway fan rekindled a previous interest in ceiling fans developed by Wallow during a trip to Brazil. Curious about the cost and quality of the Dinway fan, Wallow contacted Nassim Bachar, who was a business acquaintance of his from Chicago, who had a company called Midwest Electronics Importers. He imported various electronics from the Far East into the U.S. through Chicago. Bachar agreed to obtain 6 Dinway fans for Wallow on his next trip overseas. He brought back 6 fans, they both liked them. He then brought back 144 fans, and they started selling them. And in 1973, those 2 founded Gulf Coast Fans using Dinway fans. In 1975, Dinway officially became the exclusive supplier of DEMC, DEMCO, and Gulf Coast fans through Midwest Electric. It was official in contracts in 1975. In 1978, Gulf Coast was sold to Wilmer Barrett. He introduced the model names for the fans like the Sea Breeze and the Showboat. So in 1979, business really started to take off, and Dinway cannot supply enough fans for Gulf Coast, so Gulf Coast starts approaching other factories. And that's how we see Commander fans that look identical to the Dinway fans, and we often mix up what's Commander and what's DEMCO and whatnot. Easiest way you can tell, Dinway, DEMCO is Hong Kong. Commander is Taiwan. So that's 79 when Gulf Coast has to start approaching other factories despite having an exclusive agreement with Dinway because they can't supply fans fast enough. And that may be because in 1979, a little store called Dan's Fan City was founded, and among other things, they sold Gulf Coast fans. In 1982, the DEMCO style spinner with wood blades was patented by Ho Chen Chang, and the patent was filed in the UK. I don't know why it was filed in the UK, I just thought that was interesting and I would include it. In 1983, Dan's Fan City buys Gulf Coast to use as their official store brand. Now in 1984, there's a big lawsuit because again, in 1985, there was a contract signed that Dinway would be the exclusive supplier of Gulf Coast fans. Now, that contract was signed with William Wallow and Nassim Besher of Midwest Electronics Importers, but the contract is still valid for Gulf Coast all the way to the new owners, which is Dan's Fan City. So there's a huge lawsuit, and if you're interested in the details of that lawsuit, you can look it up online. The case law is online. That was 1984. In 2003, the Dinway factory is shut down, and in 2010, Dinway, the corporation, is dissolved. So, that was a pretty quick timeline, but it had a lot of information that I didn't know before. I didn't know much about Dinway. I'd seen their name stamped on a few things here and there, but they were one of the big players in ceiling fans from the 50s, because they were founded in 49, all the way up until at least the lawsuit in 84, and they clearly kind of trickled down after that lawsuit. So, we'll probably talk some more about Gulf Coast in the future. We're definitely going to talk about the big three. We already talked about SMC. We're going to talk a little bit about Wingtat. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've learned a lot. Please forget... What? I made it all the way to the end? Okay, one more. Please forget to like, comment, and subscribe is what I was saying. We're going to do one more. Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. Today we're going to talk about Dinway. And that's a name we don't hear very much, but they were actually a huge player in ceiling fans. They were one of the Hong Kong big three manufacturers from well before Union and... Okay. Welcome back to the Workbench. Welcome back to the Workbench. Today we're going to talk about ceiling fan... What?